was about 2-3 miles west of Plains, and at the age of 4, his father moved him to that community. And what's interesting about the community, and it was in 1928, the community had only 27 families. So 27 families living, working, playing, actually doing life together out there in archery. Only 2 of those families were white, his family and the foreman of the railroad. And that's significant because it was during the time that the separate and equal social restrictions were very, very strong, especially down in the South. And so for him to live and to grow and to play and to work with almost entirely his growing up from the time he was 4 until he left and graduated in 1941 at the age of 17. That's who he lived and worked and played among, were the almost entirely African-American people. And so that place shaped a lot of who he is and a lot of the values in his character. What was so special about that place were the people. And there were several people that were very influential in his life from the archery area, but I want to highlight a few of them because they'll go on to play some very important roles in his political career as well. But the very first one I want to introduce you to is Miss Rachael Clarke. Now, Miss Rachael Clarke was, she was the foreman of the farm. Now, President Carter's father, Mr. Earl, had the farm, and he had about 360 acres out there at the farm that and Mr. Jack is the husband of Miss Rachael. He was the foreman, and he kept things running, and he was the one who, he kept the gears well greased. And Miss Rachael Clarke was the one that President Carter loved spending time with. She taught him how to fish, she taught him how to hunt. She was the one who would go on long walks with him. She taught him all about conservation and taking care of the land. Now remember, this is 1929, 28, 1930s, and the early, that was known as the Great Depression. And so during that time, the economy was bad, the crops weren't doing well, people were out of work, which means they were out of money, which means they were probably out of hope as well. And so President Carter, living out in this area during that time, they practiced very good conservation and stewardship practices, and Miss Rachael Clarke was very instrumental in teaching him those things at a very young age. She taught him, probably more importantly, about God and about taking care of his creation and how to treat people and how to live in harmony and in unity with other people, and that is something that she very instilled in him at a very early age. He was one of the few, like I said, the white families that lived out there. So that meant that he lived and he worked, he played, he was invited into African-American homes. He sat at their table, he ate at their tables, which was very unheard of, very uncommon during that time. And one of the things that the members of the community often took advantage, not took advantage of him, but they gave him the opportunity to discuss their issues and discuss the problems and challenges that they were facing, with hopes that he would take them back to his father, who was an influential businessman, and be able to do something about them. And so he would find every opportunity and take opportunities to tell his father the conditions that the African-American people were sharing with him. And as a result, he was able to get them the help that they needed. And so that was a very early age. He was already in the process of hearing from people, hearing what their issues and what their needs were, and finding ways to help. And so Miss Rachael Clarke taught him some very valuable lessons, most of them being respect for others, conservation, and stewardship. Probably the other person, other than Miss Rachael, that had a very lasting impression upon him was his parents, but primarily his mother. Now, this picture is a photograph of Mr. Earl, the influential, like I said, he was a very influential business person, and Miss Rachael. Now, Miss Rachael, his mother, was a registered nurse, and she worked in the city of Plains at a hospital. It was known as the Wise Sanitarium at that time. And she did she did nursing there. She worked for $4 a day for a 12-hour shift. When her husband became affluent enough to where she could quit doing that, she went into private nursing, and she worked and she took care of the people in her community, primarily because they were not getting care at all, or if they were getting any, it was not very good care. So she went to work for 20 hours, not expecting to be paid, and oftentimes was not paid. She was paid probably in a chicken or some eggs or something if that was possible, but she did it without the expectation of being compensated for that. And so President Carter saw that, and he saw that giving, and he said, he describes her as my mother is the most compassionate person that he knew. He said, I knew her as the only one at that time that paid absolutely no attention to racial segregation. So at the time in the South where it was very clearly defined, those lines were very clearly drawn, the community of archery provided a place for him to interact and to share in just life. And then his mother teaching him at an early age that it doesn't matter what color your skin is, doesn't matter what church you go to, doesn't matter what religion you are, it doesn't matter anything, your income level. If you have a need and I can meet that need, then I ought to do that, take care of it. And that's what she instilled in her children. And so those two factors were so deeply infused in him that when he left the community of archery to go on to college and ultimately the Naval Academy, which was his dream, he took those same values and characters with him because they were just so much a part of who he was. So when he left, I will tell you as a little side note that there's a picture here later on of Miss Lillian. When in 1966, she was 68 years old in this picture. Just a little side, a little flash forward. This is a picture when she was watching a television show, and there was a commercial that came on for the Peace Corps. And she remembers the slogan, "You're not too old, you're not too young," and then she didn't remember the rest. But she thought, well, all right, then I'll apply. And so she did. She applied to go to the Peace Corps at the age of 68. Her only requirement on her application, or her only request on the application, was that she be sent to a place where where the people had dark skin, and that they would have a need for a nurse's services. And so that was her application. And so this is a picture that she was taken. She was sent to had her duty in a little village outside of Bombay, India, and she returned from there at the age of 70. This is a remarkable woman. Really courageous for her time. So President Carter has now he's reached the age of graduation. By the way, in state of Georgia at the time he attended, you only had to attend grades 1 through 11, and then you were finished. So if anybody's listening by live stream and you're 11th grader, if you lived in Georgia back then, you would be done. This year would be it. And so it wasn't until 1952 that the state of Georgia added grade 12. So as a 17-year-old, he left here. He went to Georgia Southwestern, which is it's a university now, but at that time it was a 2-year college over in Americus, Georgia, 10 miles from here. And it was in 1943 that he was admitted finally to the Naval Academy. That was his dream. His dream was never to become a president. That was not in his radar at all. He wanted to become a Navy officer, and he'd had that dream since he was just an 8-year-old. He was already writing the academy to see what would I have to do if I wanted to get in there. So he had finally made it. He had gotten to the academy. 2 years later, there was another person admitted to the academy, and his name was Mr. Wesley Brown. Now, Mr. Wesley Brown, this was 2 years later, 1945. He was admitted, and he was the first African-American to graduate from the Naval Academy. Now, he was not, however, the first African-American admitted. He was actually the 6th one. What do you suppose happened to the other 5?
Harassment? They just a lot of poor behavior, and they kind of forced them to leave, pretty much.
Exactly. Did you read his book? That's exactly,
No.
that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. He was not the first one, but he would describe, Mr. Wesley Brown would describe his first semester there, or his whole first year as really, he has, in his book, he says that it was tough. But it was more than tough. To give you an idea, he was so mistreated that every single day he thought about quitting. He was harassed, he was hazed, the mistreatment was unbelievable. Not just physical things, but have you ever been like excluded? Feel that feeling of like not fitting in, and he would go to the cafeteria and everybody would get up and move and walk away. And that feeling of being left out and not fit in, it was obvious that he didn't fit in, but that just added to it. And so most of the previous 5 people admitted to the academy could not endure that, and they just forced out. And they tried to force him out, and he just hung in there, and he was not going to quit. And the reason for that is that there was another midshipman there that was on the cross-country team with him, and they ran together, and during that time out they had a lot of time to talk, and this midshipman also would go to his dorm room and encourage him to stay in, hang in there, you can do it. And it was because of that midshipman's encouragement that he was able to persevere, and he did end up graduating from the academy. He had 20 years of service, and you want to guess who that Naval Academy midshipman was?
Oh, Jimmy Carter?
It was Jimmy Carter.
Mr. Jimmy Carter, you bet. Yes. In fact, in an interview that Mr. Brown did with the Baltimore Sun, this is what he quotes. "I'm not sure that I would have made it had Jimmy Carter not dropped by my dorm to visit and encourage me to hang in there." And then in 1989, President Carter wrote to his friend, and as a token of their relationship, he had written a fond letter, and at the very end of the letter, he signed the very last sentence said, "I ran with you," and then in parentheses it says, "You were better. Signed, Jimmy Carter." And I was just thinking, what do you think he meant by that? That I ran with you? I mean, it made such an impact, and Mr. Brown framed the picture and is on his wall, and it had stayed there until he passed away. But what do you think he was thinking when President Carter wrote that line, "I ran with you"?
Beyond the obvious cross-country reference.
Okay.
They were equals?
Yes, that's obvious. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You think there's maybe a deeper meaning? Maybe, I don't know. we were just trying to get inside his head, but maybe a deeper.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, running the good race.
Exactly. Yep.
The
ran a good race. We finished. Good. Thank you. That's exactly right. I think that was also part of it. As a matter of fact, the Naval Academy now, if you went there, you would see a 140,000 square foot, $45 million track and field house with Mr. Wesley Brown's name on it. And so, encouragement. I mean, that's something we can all do. We can all encourage. Are you trying to say something? Because you're on mute if you are.
Oh no, it's just wow, that's really amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's something that who can't encourage? I mean, we can all encourage, right? I mean, we could make a difference like that if we, just take the opportunities to do that. So he, in 1953, his dream career has had to come to an end because his father, Mr. Earl, becomes ill, and he passes away, and President Carter decides to come back to Plains and take over his father's business. And so he comes back to Plains, and this is 1953, and he hasn't been home a lot since the time that he left in 1941. A few times, but not that often. And so just to back up a little bit, what's going on in the country is that in 1953, he comes home, but in 1954, a historic landmark decision was made, Brown versus Board of Education. And this was the Supreme Court case that declared that the separate but equal, that Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896, that case, that was now, it overturned that. That was totally unconstitutional. And so they were mandating that, they were ordering that all the public schools be integrated. Well, you can imagine that that did not go very well. That was not taken with a lot of love. It was very opposed very much, especially down in the South. And actually massive resistance was the term that they even used. But another case, the next following year in 1955, the Brown 2, they added the phrase that with deliberate speed. And so they said they were ordering, they were making it mandatory that you integrate the public school, but you do it with deliberate speed. So it was like, I'm giving you this command or this order, this directive, but being very vague about when it has to be completed or when you have to do it. And so the school that I'm sitting in was built in 1921, did not integrate until 1966. And so the law was actually clearly passed in 1954, and this speed clause added in 55. So you're on mute. It looks like you're trying to say.
That's not really with deliberate speed.
Exactly.
To take 11 years
exactly.
to do that. That's
and there were some. You're right. And there were some in the area that didn't integrate till like late 70s.
Wow.
In this area. I mean, that's wild. I mean, I was like, almost I mean, it was, yeah. So that was what was going on, like in the landscape politically, but in the actual town of Plains, what happened as a result of those things, there were organizations and there were groups that were starting to form in opposition to this law or this case that was handed down. And one of the ones was the organization called the White Citizens Council. Now, the White Citizens Council found its way to Plains shortly after President Carter, well, he wasn't president, after Jimmy Carter had come back here in 1953. And they appeared at his door and they asked him that he needed to join this White Council, and he said he would not join. And they came back a few days later and they visited him at his warehouse, at his place of business, and said, you need to join. You're the only white male holding out. And he refused to join. Several days later, some closer friends and some of his customers came and said, your reputation and the success of your business is in jeopardy if you do not sign up and join. And since you're the only white man holding out, we'll pay your $5 for you and you can join. And he refused to join, and saying that it wasn't the $5. And so he did not join. He was willing to lose his business if he had to, and leave from Plains if he had to, but he was not going to join. And as a result, a small boycott was organized, and he did have some boycotted his business as a result. But again, that story, you can tell some of the tactics and some of the strategies of trying to get people to do things that they don't want to do. And oftentimes, that's what keeps us, or what causes us to do things, either intimidation, fear of losing something, whether it's our job or our life. But President Carter just was those characters and those values and those traits were so deeply infused in him that he was willing to lose his business if that's what it took. But he was not going to violate that, what he thought was the right thing to do. So that was what was going on. Another thing that was going on in the city of Plains when he returned was that was not the only place that there was conflict in the churches as well. Now, this is a picture of his church. The Plains Baptist Church that he was a member, him and his wife, and he had 3 grown sons by then. But he was a deacon actually at that church, and one particular week they were out of town, and it was that week that the pastor and the remaining 11 deacons decided that they were going to propose to the church the following Sunday proposal to keep the African American people out of their church, that they would not allow them to come in to worship. And so when President Carter got back, of course, and heard this, he was very upset about this. And usually there are about, he said, 35 people who would attend this church service. That particular Sunday, there were 200 that were there. And he urged them not to allow or to agree to vote in this proposal, and to that would keep the African American people from worshiping if they chose to. Out of the 200 people, only 56 people voted. 6 of the people voted that they did not want that vote to go through. The other 50 voted for it, and of course it passed, and the deacon and the pastor and the remaining deacon's proposal then became the church's policy. The 6 people that did not vote, or that did not vote for that, were President Carter, his wife, Miss Rosalind, his mother, Miss Lillian, and his 2 sons. And then there was another member of the church, and that was it. And so, just as a side though, he said that afterwards people would come up to him and tell him that they really did side with him, but they just did not want to vote. They did not want to make trouble and make a stand. And the difference there being he was just unwavering in his convictions about equal rights and equal. Public places need to be equal, and so that was going on in the community as well. In 1964, there was another landmark decision, and that really was a big law signed in by Lyndon B. Johnson, and that was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And what that did was that said that all public places, not just schools, but any public place that served public could not have any separate, unequal anything. It had to be completely open to the public, not any racial segregation at all. And so again, that caused a lot of opposition. And one of the things that I found in the Library of Congress, which is really quite interesting, is the Green Book. And there is the front cover of the Green Book. I actually printed the Green Book out, and you can see it there. But this book, I didn't even know that this book existed, but this was actually published for the first time in 1936. And the Green Book was printed for the African American traveler, so that they knew when they traveled from state to state or town to town which hotel or which business, gas station, restaurant they could even stay in. And so if you are a teacher and you're listening, or you have a really interesting activity would be for you to get a copy of the Green Book and have your children, your students, try to plan a trip across the country or whatever using only the accommodations that are in this Green Book. And I want to read to you the introduction. In 1936, when this first came out, the introduction said, "With the introduction of this travel guide in 1936, it has been our idea to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and hopefully to make his trip more enjoyable." The last paragraph of this introduction says, "There will be a day, sometime in the near future, when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States." And this last publication was printed in 1964, was the last publication of the Green Book. With the passing of this equal Civil Rights Act, this Green Book, that was the last time that book. So there was that day did come, but it was not easy to get around during those times. So in 1970, Jimmy Carter decided to run for governor. He was elected governor, and in his inaugural address, he said, this is a picture of him in his inaugural address. The first sentence is all I'm going to read to you, but he says, "Now is the time that racial discrimination is over." And this is 1970 as governor of Georgia. And to demonstrate that how serious he was about this, he put African American people into policy positions in the state and gave them some opportunities. And one of the things that he noticed when he was the governors, thousands of people, students would come through there especially, and they'd be looking all along the walls of all the greats, the state's great educators and leaders and people who had an influence in forming and shaping the state of Georgia. And he realized, as he's looking around, that all of them were white. And it dawned on him right then that it's obvious that African American people also had an influence in this shaping the state of Georgia. And so for the first time, he hung a picture, an African American picture, in the state capitol. And it was unanimous who that would be. And this was the picture that was hung, Martin Luther King's picture. So that was pretty cool. Ironically, when this was happening, while they were unveiling this, Ku Klux Klan members were circling or outside in the Capitol. And so there was still opposition, but President Carter says that, that for the most part, this was a long overdue gesture, and it was well received by most of the people. And so he knew it was not going to be favorable, but he was going to do what he thought was the right thing to do. So now he becomes president of the United States. In 1976, he decided, of 74, he announced his candidacy, and he actually ran in 76, won the election, and became 39th president of the United States. And some of the accomplishments, now that would be, his presidency could be a whole day of accomplishments right there. But just to highlight a few of the things that he was speaking in our auditorium, President's Day, just a few weeks ago, and he said to a crowd of standing room only in that auditorium that during his administration, he never fired a missile, a bullet, or dropped a bomb during his presidency, and he was deeply committed to protecting human rights on a worldwide basis. And some of the things that he did to show and demonstrate that was, remember in archery where Miss Rachael taught him the value and the appreciation for conservation and stewardship. And during his presidency, he signed into law the Anilka Act. And you in Alaska, you probably have heard of that. The Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. And that put 50 million acres into wilderness and moved 104 million acres into the National Park Service and provided protection for the land. And it's documented as one of the most important environmental legislation in the history of the nation. Now, I don't know if Alaska, I'm sure there's mixed feelings about that bill even today, but yeah, I'm seeing your head shake. I'm not hearing anything, but I'm seeing your head shake. But there again, it was something he was so in him, it was so deeply ingrained in him to protect and to be responsible for the land and for the environment, and that was coming forth in that. After another accomplishment was his Camp David Accords, and this is a picture of the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, and the Camp David, those 12 days of meeting and trying to get peace between these two countries, and successful at doing that. Well, as you know, he ran again for president in the election of 1980, lost the election, and moved back home to Plains. Now, he could have gone absolutely anywhere, but Plains to him has always been a haven, has been the place he goes, and so it was home, and he came back home in 1981 in January. And in 1982, he started the Carter Center. He founded that with his wife, Miss Rosalind, and the Carter Center has worked with countries to monitor elections. They fight diseases. They've almost completely eradicated the guinea worm in Latin America. And he also works with promoting peace. And with his work with the Carter Center, in 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And so I have Kaylee here from our curatorial Museum Tech Division, and she has this is the actual prize. This is the real deal. That's the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you think? Did you ever seen one before? Let me hear what you have.
No,
know.
we were both just going, wow, that is really uber cool. I said, you don't have the actual prize, but you do.
That's the bronze. Yep. That's the Nobel, or that's the bronze edition. He got actually 3 medallions that evening. He got 2 bronze and a gold, and this is one of the bronze. And they, but that is the real deal. Some of the other work that he has done.
It's not a. I thought it was like a medallion.
I think the gold is the one that they put around. The gold one is the one they put around your neck, and then they give you the bronzes. Is that how they do it?
The gold one around your neck, and then.
Yeah.
A gold and 2 bronze. The gold one actually is in the Atlanta Presidential Library, and the other bronze edition of sits in the Carter Center. So he has them all in displays for others to enjoy and to. So yeah. So he also his work after his post-presidency. He turned 90 October 1. He's turned 90. He still is not done with his fight and his championing for human rights. One of the things he does every year is 1 week out of the year he donates a week to work with Habitat for Humanity. And if you know, that organization works very closely with local affiliates to build houses for those in need and provide decent shelter. That he believes every person is entitled to a decent place to live. And so Kaylee has a few of his Habitat tools that she wants to show you as well.
Oh.
This is just one of the hammers he used. It's stamped with Habitat for Humanity, his signature, and the date, and it was in 1990. And usually I think every year he goes, it's the week of his birthday. So he's building a home on his birthday.
That's
and
awesome.
then since he donated it to us, he signed it too. I know you can't see really well, but that's his. He actually wrote his signature out on it. And then this one is a trowel that's also used to spread out the cement between bricks. And it's pretty well used, as you can tell. And it's just 2 of the things we have that relate to the Habitat for Humanity.
He's always been passionate about equal or human rights, and certainly that is a great organization for that. In addition to his work with the Carter Center and his work with Habitat for Humanity, he also is an author, and he has authored 29 books, and this is his latest book published. It's called A Call to Action: Women, Religion, Violence, and Power. And this is one of the things that he is he wrote because he wanted to raise awareness in government officials, public officials, to citizens everywhere about the horrible treatment of women and young girls in this country as well as other countries, from human trafficking to all kinds of other just really bad issues. And so the way he could do this was to write a book and raise awareness was the purpose of this book. He's actually sent a copy of this book to over 200 heads of government and has received, heard from a third of them already that they plan to take action. And so this is actually not just to show you what he's still doing, but also a challenge to ourselves to what can we do? What is it that we can call ourselves to? What human rights are we passionate about that we want to see made sure are made aware of or done something about, or even push up our sleeves and get in and actually go to work and help someone else in need. And this is the kind of story that President Carter has lived out in his own life. I think that the way to best summarize this program is a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt, she had a quote that she said, and she wasn't thinking and writing it about President Carter, but it just seemed like it couldn't have been handwritten for any better and fit any better person. Her quote is, "Where, after all, do universal rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person. the neighborhood he lives in, the school or the college they attend, the factory, the farm, the office where they work. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seek equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they will have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's an awesome quote.
What struck a chord?
It starts with each of us, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yep. You know, we're not, we can't change the world. We're one person. But from President Carter's example and from this quote too, it's just empowering to know that we can change the world probably for one person. Maybe it's a conversation we strike. Maybe it's interacting with someone who doesn't look like we look. Maybe striking up a conversation. That is what archery taught President Carter, that when people interact and when people sit at a table and share a meal and do the things like that, that is where racial barriers are torn down. Not with laws being passed and not with legislation, but being involved and interested in other people. Encouraging. We can encourage. Be an encourager. I mean, to think, you know, there were many people that went through that academy. How many of them does he recall? He remembers the one that encouraged. And surely we can be an encourager. We can change the world probably for another Wesley Adams somewhere. And so it's a really powerful thought to know that the Plains, the area that he grew up and shaped archery in Plains area, this community shaped him. And but it's also available for us. So, you know, if we're between the ages of 4 and 90, and we have a small town that's not even maybe on a map, I don't know where you are, but I grew up in a little town, not quite archery size, but we're in good company. We're in good company because we can learn and take these, what we've learned from President Carter and his experiences and go and apply them in our own situation and go and make a difference and change the world for one. And if we repeat that often enough, that will be carrying on President Carter's legacy. So I challenge you to make a difference. Go make a difference.
Okay.
So that is
Every
my
day.
end of my conclusion. Do you have any? What's that?
Oh, I just said we try.
We try every
What'd you
day.
say?
We try every day.
All right. So do you have any questions for me or for Kaylee?
How big is the collection of artifacts that you have?
And our digital records that we have digitally cataloged, it's close to 8,000. And then with archives and stuff, we sit at 180,000 objects. With archives too, counting all the archives. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And it ranges from when he was a boy, farm stuff, China from the house, to post-presidency things like the habitat hammer, a guinea worm, things like that.
How do you archive a guinea worm?
The one that's on exhibit, yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know what that is, but it sounds cool.
It's a big range, and then we have fun campaign, a nice campaign collection of objects. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Wow. Huh. Wow.
Well, that's great. I hope that if we probably didn't answer questions, but I hope if more than that we left you with questions, that you will now go and dig further and be aware of some things and go and use this as just a springboard to going and making and changing a life or a difference, gleaning the information that we learned and applying it now in our situation. So go make a difference.
Well, thank you very much. And I took a picture of your
Okay,
email.
thank you, Nancy.
So
and
if you have
Tammy,
questions,
for,
we can
being
do
our
that.
presenters today. And you can see here on the slide our k20internet2.edu/presidents website is where you can see the video archives for all of the programs in this series, and you'll also find information for registering for our future events. Our next event coming up will be on March 10th. It will be the Lincoln Memorial from the National Mall in Washington, D.C. We'll be presenting at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock Central Time, and we hope that you'll be able to join us for that. And thank you for joining us.